In this lesson, we're going to talk about integers. We're going to talk about how we compare integers and order integers. And first, we're just going to look at how much you know about integers at this point. We need to define what an integer is. We talk about numbers in math a lot, that we have specific names for certain ones, so we actually need to define what an integer is. Here is your definition for an integer. Integers are positive numbers, which we work with quite frequently, negative numbers, which we're going to learn about, and zero. So go ahead and write that under your definition on your handout. Now let's fill in the table on your handout, and we're actually going to look at some examples of integers that we would use in real-world situations. For example, in a football game, if the runner loses 5 yards on a play, how would I write that as an integer? Well, going over to the other column, you would write it as minus 5 because he lost 5 yards. The second example is profit. Profit is when you make money. So if I'm going to make money, I would be increasing, so I would have a profit or positive 150. We don't normally write the plus sign in front of numbers because we just assume they're positive unless there's something else in front of them. But in this instance, we'll go ahead and write that plus sign. 72 feet below sea level. Below is your key word. That means it's going to be under something, so this is going to be a minus 72. And the last example, again, 12 degrees below zero would be a minus 12. I'm going to ask you to add something onto your page and see if you can come up with this. Give me an example of a sport that might use negative numbers. Write that down on your page. A sport that might use negative numbers. Okay, and then we'll talk about that when we discuss our notes. As we talk about integers and we talk about positive and negative numbers, then we also have some other examples that we need to discuss. So we need to talk about opposites. So we're going to define opposites next on your handout. Okay, the definition of opposites are numbers that are the same distance from zero, but in opposite directions. So one of them is going to be a positive number, and one of them is going to be a negative number. Also, there's a unique characteristic of opposites. When you add these two numbers together, you're going to get 0. So if I add two opposites numbers, let's just say 1, we're going to use 1 plus negative 1. Well, they're the same distance from 0, but in opposite directions. So when I add them up together, they're going to cancel each other out and become 0. So make sure you have that in your notes somewhere because that is a very unique characteristic that you need to remember. Now we need to talk about absolute value, and we need to make sure that you understand the difference between opposites and absolute value because this can be a confusing concept to students. So let's go ahead and write the definition of absolute value. And here's your definition. A number's distance from 0, it doesn't matter which direction on the number line you're going, it just wants to know how many spaces from 0 is that number. Okay, so let's look at a number line and look at absolute value on a number line. Let's say, for example, I want to find the absolute value, and I'll mark this on the number line, of 3. Well, I want to know how many spaces, and I'm going to write this down here, how many spaces from 0 is 3? Let me go 1, 2, 3. So the absolute value of 3 equals 3. Now I want to find the absolute value of negative 2. I'm going to go and draw on my number line. Here's negative 2. This time I'm going to go to the right, 1 space, 2 spaces. Okay, so what's the absolute value of negative 2? Well, it's 2 spaces from 0. So that's how we look on a number line, trying to figure out the absolute value of a number. Okay, absolute value symbols are the vertical lines. And what we do is we put the number inside the vertical line. So we're going to look at the example on your worksheet where I have the absolute value of negative 8 inside vertical lines. And this is read as the absolute value of negative 8, or find the absolute value of negative 8. Okay, so I would find the absolute value of negative 8 by thinking how many spaces from 0 is negative 8. Well, it's only 8 spaces, so the absolute value of negative 8 equals 8. And once I have found the absolute value, I no longer need the vertical lines. One thing that you need to remember is absolute value is always positive. Highlight that, circle it, whatever you need to do on your handout. Okay, so now I have a bunch of information. I talked about integers being positive and negative numbers and 0. I've talked about opposites going in both directions from 0. I've talked about absolute value being the number spaces from 0. Now I'm going to look at putting integers in order, and I'm going to use a number line to do that. Okay, so you have a number line on your handout, and I'm going to write some numbers on the screen, and we're going to put them in order from least to greatest on the number line. When you draw a number line, the first thing you need to do is mark 0 on your number line. So let's look at these numbers. 4, negative 3, 0, negative 1, and 1. So now I need to go to my number line and I need to start marking off each segment. So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, and I'm going to be using 4. I'm going to go the other direction, starting with negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. So now I'm going to put these numbers in order on the number line. So let's look at, we'll plot 4 first. So I'm going to plot 4, it goes right here. I'm going to plot negative 3, it goes right here. I'm going to plot 0. I'm going to plot negative 1, and I'm going to plot 1. Now by looking at my number line, they're all in order. So now I'm going to say this is the order from least to greatest. Negative 3 would be first, negative 1 would be second, then 0, then 1, and then 4. So this is my answer. These numbers are in order from least to greatest. And most of the time that's how we will order them unless they tell you something different. Okay, let's fill in some more blanks on your handout. Numbers to the right of 0 are going to be your positive numbers. Positive to right of 0. So that means negative numbers are going to be to the left of 0. And we're going to use this information in order to compare integers. Please note this important information on your handout, circle it, highlight. Numbers increase in value from left to right. So the number that's farther on the right will have the larger value. Okay? Okay, let's look at the 3 examples on your handout. First example is negative 8 and 8. I want to compare these two numbers. And if I look at a number line, which number is farther to the right? Well, 8 is farther to the right, so that's the greater number. So negative 8 is less than 8. The next example is negative 1. and I want to compare this to 18. Well, if I look at a number line, 18 is farther to the right, so it's the greater number, so -1 is less than 18. And the last one, I'm comparing 16 to -14. Well, if I look at the number line, -14 is on the left side of 0, and 16 is on the right side of 0. So 16 is going to be greater than -14. All right, for your one got it problem, you're only going to do one got it problem for this lesson. And it's on the bottom of your page, and it wants you to put those numbers in order from least to greatest. So I want you to draw a number line, and I want you to plot those numbers on the number line. Make sure that you're labeling all your tick marks as 0, 1, 2, 3, and then -1, -2, -3. Put those in order on the number line, and then write them in the correct order for me on your paper. Okay? Then we'll talk about these when we have a chance. You'll have a couple worksheets to work on, and good luck with integers.